Welcome to the RASCANU Show. Our guest today is Councillor Bradford, who is the City Councillor representing Beaches East York on Toronto City Council. He was first elected in 2018 as one of the youngest members of Council. At City Hall, Brad serves as the Chair of the Planning and Housing Committee, Vice Chair of Toronto and East York Community Council, and is member of the Toronto Arts Board and Creatio Board. He has experience as an urban planner, and his priorities are to increase affordability and access to housing, make our streets safer, and revitalize Toronto's main streets. It's a real pleasure to spend time with you today, Councillor.
Good to be here with you, Alex.
Would you be kind enough to tell us a little bit about yourself, from your point of view, a little bit about your story, and why you got involved in municipal politics in Toronto?
Sure. I can be brief about it. My background's in urban planning. I worked in the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, and then most recently in the chief planner's office here at the City of Toronto. I was doing that for a couple of years, and it was actually my first exposure to government. While there was a lot of cool stuff going on, there was also that frustration as a, sort of younger millennial here in the city. With big hopes and dreams and ambitions, like a lot of us, I kept seeing us slip further and further behind on the housing file. I was also simultaneously a member of an organization called Civic Action, this diversity fellowship, and we would get together every month, and I'd hear from my 25 fellows and all the really incredible work they were doing in the city. There was someone who was working with at-risk youth and working with seniors, creating food banks, and I would show up each month and just sort of express my dissatisfaction with local government. So that was kind of catalytic. My colleagues said, "Stop complaining about it, put your hand up and give it a shot. Why don't you run for office?" So that was back in 2018. We could spend a lot of time on the campaign, but that would put everyone to sleep. But all said and done, I knocked 50,000 doors, beat the guy who was supposed to win by 288 votes, and I've been on council since. What I love about it is your capacity to create positive change in your community and across the city. That's what it's all about. And there are not a lot of seats more effective than one through local council on local government if you want to drive change that will actually make a difference in people's lives. So I'm very lucky.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. So if we're thinking about making positive change, there must be a person or a couple of individuals who really inspire you, or who perhaps inspired you as you got going in city council. Are you able to mention one or two of those people?
Well, you know what? Honestly, I seek inspiration from people in my day-to-day life that I come across, in my journey, in my capacity as someone in the community, in my capacity as a councillor. There are truly so many incredible Torontonians. I'm not just saying that, but the struggles and the challenges that people overcome, whether that's around the affordability challenges, whether that is being an entrepreneur, starting a small business, growing it, seeing it flourish, whether that is, someone who is raising kids here in the city, maybe on their own. Maybe people will laugh at me, but my mom is a huge inspiration. She was a single mom who raised 3 kids on her own, from 6, 5, and 2. And now as a father of, a 2.5-year-old and a 4-month-old, I cannot fathom doing that on your own. And so her drive and determination, that resilience, honestly really inspires me. She sort of set the bar, and I guess it's just my hope to sort of try and measure up and meet her there. She's an incredible woman.
That's interesting. So was it her train of thought to get involved in elected government, and you just happened to be the first one, or did you inspire her to run for office and win her own seat?
Yeah, I guess for the listeners, my mom's an MP in the government, a little further west on the 401 down in Kitchener. And no, I mean, she had worked in the small business sector. Most recently, she was working for the city of Kitchener doing economic development, so bringing jobs in manufacturing, particularly the automotive sector out there, into the region. And like a lot of folks, when the pandemic hit, 2021, she was just going to call it a career and retire. And then a strange series of events took place where the seat for member of parliament was open. She sought the nomination and was able to win that, and then won the election in 2021. So Steve Paikin had written an article a couple years ago. It was the only example he can point to of a parent following a child into politics. But I don't think it wouldn't be me that it was the inspiration. It was, again, her drive to serve her community in a different way.
That's great. I appreciate you sharing that story. I think it's inspiring and might inspire others to follow suit. Now, if we're thinking about the types of initiatives that you're working on right now on City Council, perhaps they're serving directly the residents in the Beaches East York community where I personally live, or it may be that it's impacting somewhere across the city. What are some specific initiatives that you have been working on where you might be able to point to a specific win or somewhere where you're really grinding at it and you're looking for some really meaningful impact in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, my priorities are really, I think, the priorities of the vast majority of Torontonians and certainly residents in Beaches East York. And just to center everyone, we're talking East End, Coxwell to Victoria Park, Lake Ontario up to Sunrise, which is just south of Eglinton. So that's a little corner of the city that we both call home. But it's about affordability. And when you think about the biggest bill that all of us, pay every month, it's our rent or our mortgage. So housing, which is a huge passion of mine in the planning background. That's been something I've been really driving both last term and this term as well. Road safety, we want our streets to be safe for everybody. We want to support active transportation, all the different ways people get around Toronto. So been big on that. Supporting the small business sector. You think about streets like Queen Street or Kingston Road, Gerrard, Danforth, O'Connor, St. Clair. These are main streets where, it's really the variety of small businesses, places to gather, places to hang out. That's what attracts people. And that's why Toronto is a city of neighborhoods. So big on the small business file and, getting serious about traffic congestion and public safety. I think those are quality of life issues in the city. Alex, you want specifics, on housing affordability. I took it on the chin, championing the Trenton Cedar Vale supportive housing. Some of your listeners, if they were dialed in a couple of years ago, you might have heard that the parking lot, that's the heart of the community. And it turned into a bit of a meme, but there was a lot of pushback and there was a lot of tone in some of the conversations, making assumptions about the type of people who are going to live there. And the reality is, if you want to change somebody's life, one of the most impactful things you can do is ensure that they have the security of housing, a roof over their head, the support so that they be successful. We stood that up in record time, despite tremendous opposition. And you know what? I don't know, a year and a half later, the building functions beautifully. Wood Green is a tremendous operator, and for the 40 plus residents that call that building home, it's been transformative. Road safety stuff, folks can blame me for Danforth bike lanes. I think that we saw people moving different ways throughout the pandemic, a lot more walking, a lot more active transportation. The reality is it was, Danforth was functioning as a road where people just drove through. They didn't spend any time. Now we've made it much more accommodating for people, and businesses actually love this space. A lot of the small business love the space because it animates Danforth in a way we didn't have before. Small business, we brought in a new, this is down in the weeds here, but brought in a new small business sub-tax class so that we stop taxing mom and pop shops on Main Street at the same rate as downtown office buildings. So that was a really important affordability measure. I always say, it is so hard to be an entrepreneur, a small business owner in any environment, and the city of Toronto certainly makes it more difficult than most jurisdictions. So this was an opportunity to work with the province. Originally Minister Phillips, then Minister Sakaria, Now all that stuff goes through Minister Bethenthal. So there's been a couple of changes in the portfolio, but they were really committed to helping the city of Toronto unlock that. And then, on the congestion front, I recognize that people lose hours every week stuck in gridlock. So common sense solutions, trying to coordinate our construction projects better, making sure that we actually rebuild the Gardner connection to the Don Valley Parkway, because I know that's such an important artery to move goods and people. And the idea of slamming all that traffic down on Lakeshore, I think would be a poor move in the long term. So there's a couple specifics.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Now, one of the items that you did mention was housing, and there are a lot of conversations happening around the demand side of housing. There aren't too many conversations or insufficient number of conversations that are deeply thought out when it comes to the supply side of housing. There's usually conversation around there should be more housing, but the specifics, is where we get tangled up. And I was reading an article that Oliver Moore wrote in the Globe and Mail. It was published on last Wednesday, on October 25th. And the article is titled, "Toronto's Housing Plan Needs Billions in Grants." And it reads, Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow's push to build homes for tens of thousands of people will require at least $1 billion in annual grants from higher levels of government and billions more in low-cost loans. Ms. Chow won office with a pledge to create 65,000 affordable homes, increasing by 25,000 the city's previous goals. But as we go through the article, and as we go down into the weeds and we look at items on the city council agenda where we can see how much movement is actually happening on the housing supply file, we notice that there's a total of 5 sites in the entirety of the city where there is an opportunity to proceed, this is public. These are public lands. There are 5 locations where there's development that is scheduled, and there's an opportunity to further pursue development on 47 other city-owned housing-ready sites, but there's no funding for those additional ones. So the level of new supply that is available based within the budget allocation right now seems to be around 4,500 new units, but even that won't be met with just these specific 5 sites. So there's a huge revenue versus expenditure gap here that is being requested for it to be basically filled by the provincial and federal levels of government, which they're challenged as well. Do you have any specific thoughts on this, and are there certain solutions that you think should be considered when it comes to new housing supply in the city of Toronto?
Yeah, well, so for those who are listening, Alex pulling up the documents. I could see he's been through the 42-page report line by line. This guy's plugged in, and I love to see it. That report to me really constitutes a wish list. It's a housing plan, but it's really wrapped in a big bow of asks, and those asks are dollars. That's the reality, as you said. It's more than $1 billion a year in asks in terms of grants, and then tens of billions more in low-cost financing on the long term. So if that doesn't materialize, it's just words on a paper. I think the most important thing that we can do to address the affordability crisis and the housing crisis is to make sure that we have houses that people can afford. And it's an important distinction. A lot of the content has been focused around affordable housing. That means different things to different people. There's different levels of affordability. You can talk about rent geared to income. That can be a very, very significant subsidy on a per month, per year basis in perpetuity. You can talk about the old marker of 80% average market rent. Well, in the city of Toronto, there's more than one market. Average market rent in Scarborough is different than downtown, and it's different than Etobicoke. So that's an imperfect imperfect metric as well. But one of the biggest challenges, as I see it, is we don't have housing that people can afford, and people who have good jobs who don't qualify for any subsidies. Maybe they make $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year. It's a good income, but you're not living large in Toronto. And in fact, you're actually being pushed out of the city. And that's exactly what we saw last year, with more than 50,000 people in a flight for affordability leaving Toronto. Our future success and prosperity as a city is predicated on the idea that if you want to live here, you can afford to do it. And so while there's some stuff in here that will be deeply affordable, stuff that, aims to address the, folks who have bigger socioeconomic challenges, there is nothing there for middle-class Torontonians. There is nothing there in that plan for folks who aspire to have home ownership or building some equity. And so how do you do that stuff? Well, I think the answer is supply. It's no secret that the approval timelines in Toronto are abhorrently slow. We actually lead North America with the slowest approval timelines, more than 1,200 days to be able to pull a permit. And I think what we're seeing in this inflationary environment, construction costs up 30%, financing costs up, labor shortages, a very tight labor and trade market. Time really is money. If you had started a project, 3 years ago, you'd be well on your way. If you're trying to start a project today, you're underwater. It's, we've seen a softening of prices in terms of what you can sell those units on a per square foot basis. We've seen a softening, but costs to build are still up. And so we have to get serious about reforming our approval process. I was leading that work with the former mayor, Mayor Tory, and our housing action plan. Mayor Chow, to her credit, has me in that role, continuing to find ways to expedite the process. And to the province's credit, they've swung a big hammer, but they've made some moves that will require all municipalities to move forward at speed. So that's a new development and growth division here at the City of Toronto. One window, more accountability, someone who's actually going to make a decision, a team's approach to application reviews, so that we don't have 20 plus different divisions commenting and having people stuck in the spin cycle. If our priority is housing and getting towards housing, we have to simplify the process. We can get into all the details if you want, but there's a lot of work that we need to do on that end. And if we can unlock supply, that will provide more housing options for more people in more neighborhoods. That will help with affordability. And again, it's about making sure that this is a city where you can have a good job, you can have employment, and you can find somewhere to live, to build a family, to build a life, and to make a contribution to our economy.
Brilliant. Now, if someone did want to get into the weeds and was passionate about urban planning, was passionate about how can we get new housing supply on board, how can we streamline the application process for the conversion of maybe a barely used plaza into a mixed use tower that maybe is 8 to 10 stories tall, that would be suitable for that specific site in that neighborhood. If someone was interested in getting involved on supporting the work that's being done on that file, how can they get plugged in?
Well, we're out in the market, so to speak, on consultation right now on our urban design guidelines. Those things have been extremely obstructionist to moving new projects forward. Same with our mid-rise guidelines. You go back to the Jennifer Keesmaat era in city planning, a lot of those policies came forward at that time. And, not quite 10 years later, we look in the rear view and ask, what are the results? Well, Toronto was supposed to be the mid-rise city. You're out on Kingston Road, we've got a few of them, but by and large, over the past 10 years, we've only built 130 mid-rise buildings. That's despite the fact that this has been one of the busiest markets in the entire continent, the most cranes, the most investment, all the hyperbole you want to add, and yet the mid-rise has failed to materialize. So you have to go back and ask the fundamental questions, well, why? It's because in Toronto, it's as hard to build a 6-story building as it is a 60-story building. So we get tall towers, and then we have neighborhoods which have been off limits since we amalgamated as a city at the turn of the century. And that has kept people out of neighborhoods. It's made it difficult to build the type of housing stock and supply that we want to see. So I legalized multiplex when I was the chair of planning and housing. We've eliminated exclusionary zoning. We are doing as of right on our major streets. We are also going back to the avenues. We're adding as of right permissions to do more density there. And we have to challenge these planning assumptions. The dogma and the doctrine that has sort of governed our official plan for decades, all of that stuff needs to be challenged, because what we're doing right now isn't working. So we need to look at angular plane. We need to come up with building guidelines that are actually financially viable to deliver the supply that we desperately need. And when it comes to conversion, whether that is employment, whether that is office, all of those options need to be on the table. We cannot take a dogmatic lens where it's just this is how it is because it always has been, and expect for our housing crisis to get any better. Everything has to be on the table. Challenge the assumptions. And if you are interested in getting involved in this, like I said, make sure that you're contributing to those public consultation processes. You can see everything that we're out on the city planning website. Or, of course, you can send me an email, councillor_Bradford@toronto.ca. And I love to talk shop around this stuff.
Sounds good. Well, I'll take you up on that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you being on the RASCANU Show. It's been such a pleasure to speak about housing matters, your career, and the kind of positive impact that you're able to make as a city councillor in the city of Toronto. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. We'll see you in the Big East.